The air in a Manhattan penthouse 60 floors above the sleeping city can make a man feel like a god. For tech billionaire Callahan Draven, it was his Olympus. Fresh from the silken sheets of a woman who was not his wife, he felt invincible, the master of his universe. But invincibility is an illusion, and universes can collapse in an instant. As he stepped out of his private elevator and into the silent marble foyer of his own home, he expected to find his pregnant wife sleeping soundly. Instead, he found her waiting for him in the pale light of dawn, a single manila envelope resting on the table between them. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him with the calm of a settled storm and slid the envelope across the table. They were divorce papers, and that was only the beginning of his world's end. The scent of her was still on his skin, a heady mix of expensive perfume, fleur de nuit, and something uniquely her own, something wild and intoxicating. Callahan Draven adjusted the cuff of his $30,000 Patek Philippe, watched the metallic click echoing the sterile precision of Sasha Petrova's apartment. Everything in her world was glass and chrome and monochrome, a landscape as sleek and emotionless as their affair. It was a perfect escape, a sterile chamber where he could shed the skin of husband, of impending father, and simply be the titan of industry, the conqueror. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, a flicker of something not quite guilt, but a dull approximation of it stirring in his chest. He dismissed it. Guilt was an inefficient emotion. He loved his wife, Ginevra. Of course he did. He loved her in the way he loved his company, Draven Innovations, with a fierce, possessive pride. She was beautiful, intelligent, the perfect complement to the life he had meticulously built. Their child, a son they'd already named Spencer, was the final triumphant piece of the puzzle. A legacy. The private elevator descended soundlessly, carrying him from the cold heights of his indiscretion back to the warmth of his life. As the doors whispered open directly into his tri-level residence overlooking Central Park, the contrast was immediate. The air here was different. It smelled of lemon polish, of the fresh flowers Ginevra insisted on having delivered twice a week, and faintly of the lavender-scented candles she burned to help her sleep. It smelled of home. A knot of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying began to dissolve. He'd slip into bed, wrap his arms around his wife's growing belly, and inhale the familiar, comforting scent of her hair. By morning, Sasha would be a ghost, a pleasant but forgettable dream. But the living room was not dark. A single soft lamp cast a pool of golden light on the custom-made Italian sofa. And in that light sat Ginevra. She wasn't in her usual silk pajamas. She was dressed in tailored slacks and a simple cashmere sweater, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat, professional chignon. Her face, usually so open and warm, was a mask of serene neutrality. Her blue eyes, which could sparkle with laughter or deepen with love, were as calm and cool as a frozen lake. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly a perfect proud curve beneath the sweater, but tonight she didn't look soft or maternal. She looked formidable. Ginevra Callahan's voice was a low murmur, his carefully constructed nonchalance suddenly feeling brittle. "You're up late, or early." He forced a smile, moving to shrug off his jacket. "Couldn't sleep." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze tracked his movements, missing nothing. She saw the faint crease in his shirt that hadn't been there when he left for his late-night board dinner. She saw the microscopic speck of glitter on his collar, a relic from Sasha's shimmering cocktail dress. She saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I slept," she said, her voice even and clear, devoid of the tremor he'd expected. "And then I woke up. I find I've been doing a lot of that lately. Waking up. He walked towards her, his movements suddenly feeling clumsy. He reached out to touch her cheek, a gesture that had always soothed her. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean into his touch either. She simply sat there, allowing it, and her stillness was a more potent rejection than if she had slapped his hand away. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dropping into the concerned, gentle tone he used to close billion-dollar deals and to calm her pregnancy-related anxieties. On the polished mahogany coffee table in front of her, next to a crystal vase of white tulips, was a thick manila envelope. It looked jarringly out of place, a bureaucratic intrusion into their curated domestic perfection. Ginevra finally looked away from him, her gaze falling to the envelope. "I think we need to talk about the future, Callahan." "Okay," he said, slowly pulling his hand back. "The future is great. We have Spencer on the way. The new wing of the hospital is about to open with our name on it. Draven Innovations is projected to break records next quarter." He listed his triumphs like a shield. "Our future is not a corporate prospectus," she replied, the first hint of steel entering her voice. She picked up the envelope. The paper was crisp, the weight of it substantial. "I'm talking about our future, yours and mine." She slid it across the table. It stopped inches from his hand. His name was typed on the front, with his lawyer's address underneath. Callahan J. Draven, C.O. Latham and Watkins, LLP. A cold dread, wholly unfamiliar, began to creep up his spine. He stared at the envelope, refusing to touch it, as if it were a venomous snake. "Ginevra. What is this? If this is about me being late, it's not about you being late, Callahan. It's about where you were." Her voice remained unnervingly calm. "It's about the penthouse you've been leasing under a shell corporation for the last 6 months. It's about the Cartier Love bracelet you purchased 2 weeks ago, the one that isn't on my wrist. It's about Sasha Petrova, the senior vice president of acquisitions at a rival firm of all people. Do you really think I'm that stupid, that I'm just another one of your beautiful passive assets?" His blood ran cold. He had been so careful. Encrypted communications, cash payments through his security chief, Rob Miller. A shell corporation so deeply buried it would take a forensic accountant months to unravel. How he opened his mouth to deny it, to lie, to gaslight, to do what he always did, reshape reality to his will. But the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't the fiery rage of a woman scorned. It was the detached pity of a physician diagnosing a terminal illness. She already knew. All of it. "Don't," she said softly, anticipating his denial. "Don't insult me by lying. Not now. I've given you 7 years of my life, Callahan. My loyalty. My body to carry your son. The very least you can give me is a moment of unvarnished truth." He sank onto the ottoman opposite her, the bravado draining from him, leaving behind a hollow, buzzing fear. He looked at the envelope again. "What is it, Ginevra?" He whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's a petition for dissolution of marriage." She stated, her voice as clear as a bell in the silent room. "I've filed for divorce. That's a copy for you. My brother filed the original papers with the court this morning. It's done. Divorce." The word hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was an impossibility, a bug in the code of his perfect life. People like him didn't get divorced. Their wives stood by them. They tolerated indiscretions. They understood the pressures men like him were under. They accepted the diamond bracelets and the lavish apologies and kept the family portrait intact. "You can't be serious," he stammered, shaking his head. "Ginevra, you're pregnant. We're having a baby. You can't do this to us." To him? For the first time, an emotion flickered across her face, a profound, weary sadness. "I'm not doing this to him, Callahan. I'm doing this for him. I will not raise my son in a house where his mother is a fool and his father is a liar. I won't teach him that love is about possession and loyalty is a transaction. He deserves better." She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. "And so do I." She walked past him, her scent the real one, the one that smelled of lavender and home washing over him for a brief, agonizing moment. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. "Wait, we can fix this. I'll end it. I'll do anything. Counseling, whatever you want." Ginevra looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Her expression was unreadable. "The time for fixing things was yesterday, Callahan, or the day before that, or any of the dozens of days you chose to lie to my face. The only thing left to do now is to be civilized about the separation of our assets." She gently pulled her arm free from his grasp. "My brother Leo will be in touch with your lawyer. I've already packed a bag. I'll be staying with him until my new place is ready." She walked towards the foyer without a second glance. The titan of industry, the man who could move markets with a single tweet, was left kneeling on a Persian rug, his world reduced to a single manila envelope. The dawn was breaking over Central Park, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but for Callahan Draven, the world had just gone completely irrevocably dark. Callahan remained motionless for a long time, the silence of the massive apartment pressing in on him. The divorce papers sat on the table like a death sentence. His first instinct was denial, a complete system rejection of this new reality. This was a tantrum, a dramatic, hormonal, pregnancy-fueled outburst. She would cool down. She would realize what she was throwing away. He would send flowers an entire greenhouse of them. He would buy her that ridiculously expensive painting she'd admired. He would grovel. He would win. He finally reached for the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a cold, brutal stack of legal documents. Irreconcilable differences. The phrase was a mockery. Their lives were perfectly reconciled, a merger of his power and her grace. He scanned the pages, his eyes catching on clauses and demands. Exclusive use of the Bridgehampton property pending settlement, liquidation of joint portfolio accounts, full physical custody of the unborn child, Spencer Cole Draven. That last line was a knife to the heart. His son. The idea that another man, Leo Morrison, her sanctimonious lawyer brother, had typed those words, had plotted with his wife to take his child, ignited a new feeling rage. The hollow fear was replaced by a white-hot fury. How dare she, after everything he'd given her? He grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact. No. This required a more powerful tool. He dialed his lawyer, David Chen, the most ruthless litigator in New York. "David?" He barked when the man answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Wake up. We have a problem. A big one." 2 days later, Callahan sat in David Chen's sterile conference room, the reality of the situation sinking in like concrete. Ginevra wasn't backing down. She wasn't answering his calls, texts, or the desperate emails he'd sent. The mountain of flowers he'd had delivered to her brother's address had been sent back, refused. "She's not bluffing, Callahan," David said, pushing a file across the table. "This isn't a spontaneous act. This is a meticulously planned operation. Her brother isn't some small-time family lawyer. Leo Morrison is a partner at Sterling and Croft. They're sharks." "I have more sharks," Callahan retorted. "That's not the point. Look at this." David tapped a page. "They've already filed a motion to freeze a significant portion of your personal assets, citing risk of dissipation. They've documented everything. And I mean everything. The file contained the fruits of Ginevra's quiet investigation. It was terrifyingly thorough. There were credit card statements from a black card he kept for discretionary spending, highlighting charges for the penthouse lease dinners at restaurants he'd never taken Ginevra to, and the purchase from Cartier. There were phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts to a single number sashes. Most damningly, there was a sworn affidavit from a private investigator, a woman named Helen Sharp. This is where Callahan's hubris had truly betrayed him. He, a tech mogul, a man who'd made his fortune on data and surveillance, had been outmaneuvered. He thought back, trying to pinpoint the moment he'd lost control. The story, as pieced together by his own frantic security team, was a masterclass in quiet rebellion. It hadn't started with suspicion of an affair. It had started 3 months ago with a simple charitable donation. Ginevra sat on the board of a foundation for underprivileged youth. She'd pledged a significant sum at a gala, a sum she assumed would come from their joint philanthropic account. When she went to authorize the transfer, the account had several $1 million less than she'd expected. She had asked him about it. He'd been dismissive, blaming a market fluctuation, a delayed wire transfer. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I'll handle the foundation." He'd patted her on the head, effectively dismissing her from the financial part of their lives, as he often did. That was his first mistake. He underestimated her. Ginevra wasn't just a pretty socialite. She had a degree in architecture and had run her own small but successful design firm before they married. She understood numbers. The discrepancy gnawed at her. It felt wrong. So she started digging quietly. She used a password. She wasn't supposed to know the name of their first dog, a detail he'd long forgotten, to access his personal expense reports, filed meticulously by his assistant. There, hidden among legitimate charges for private jets and client dinners, she found the recurring lease payment for a property in a building where they had no business. Project Olympus, he'd codenamed the expense. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. That's when she called her brother. Leo was everything Callahan was not: quiet, steady, and deeply moral. He had always been wary of Callahan's charismatic whirlwind, seeing the steel trap of control beneath the charm. He listened to his sister's trembling voice and told her to do nothing rash. He advised her to gather information, to play the part of the happy, oblivious wife while they built a fortress. Leo was the one who recommended Helen Sharp, a discreet ex-MI6 agent turned private investigator who specialized in high net worth individuals. Helen was a ghost. For 6 weeks, she followed Callahan. She documented his late-night visits to the penthouse. She photographed him with Sasha, laughing in a dimly lit bar, his hand resting possessively on her back. She even managed to get a source inside Cartier to confirm the bracelet purchase and its recipient. While Helen gathered the evidence, Ginevra played her role to perfection. She hosted dinner parties, smiled at his side at charity events, and discussed baby names with him, all while a storm of betrayal and heartbreak raged inside her. The strength it must have taken staggered him. He had looked into her eyes every night and seen only the reflection of his own lies. The final piece of the plan was the most brilliant and the most cutting. Ginevra knew Callahan's greatest weakness wasn't his lust, but his ego. A screaming, crying wife could be dismissed as hysterical. A calm, rational, business-like separation, that was a language he understood. She and Leo had spent weeks with her lawyers drafting the papers, planning the timing, and preparing for the inevitable scorched earth tactics Callahan would employ. She waited for the perfect moment. The night after he returned from a business trip to Tokyo, a trip he'd cut short by a day, telling her he missed her, when in reality he'd spent the last 24 hours with Sasha, who had coincidentally been there as well. That was the final insult. He had lain in their bed, fresh from another woman, and spoken of his love for her and their son. And so she had waited. She'd let him go to his board dinner. She dressed not for a fight, but for a corporate takeover of her own life. She laid the trap and waited for the Titan to walk into it. She built a kill box. Callahan David Chen concluded, his face grim. And you walked right into it. She has the evidence, the moral high ground, and a team of lawyers ready for war. She's not asking for an unreasonable settlement given your net worth. But on the matter of custody, she will not budge. And with this evidence of infidelity, and what they'll frame as moral negligence, she has a very, very strong case. Callahan stared out the window at the New York skyline, the buildings he'd once seen as his kingdom, now feeling like the bars of a cage. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he hadn't noticed the quiet, brilliant architect in his own home designing his demolition. The rage was still there, but now it was laced with a terrifying, grudging respect. He had been outplayed, and the game was just beginning. Losing Ginevra was a wound to his heart. Losing control was a wound to his soul. In the week that followed, Callahan oscillated between frantic attempts at reconciliation and a cold, calculated fury. He instructed David Chen to fight back on every front, to counterfile, to bury Leo Morrison and his team in paperwork. He would not lose his son. But his focus was fractured. The emotional turmoil was bleeding into his professional life. He was distracted in meetings, snapping at his executives, his mind constantly replaying that final chilling conversation with Ginevra. He sought refuge in the two things that had never failed him, work and Sasha. He called her the day after the confrontation. "We need to be more careful." He'd said, his voice tight. "Ginevra knows." There was a calculated pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Callahan." "I'm so sorry," Sasha said, her voice a perfect blend of sympathy and concern. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fix it," he'd growled. "But for now, I need a distraction." Their meetings became more frequent, more reckless. He no longer saw her at the penthouse, which his team was now scrubbing clean of any trace of her. Instead, they met at discreet hotels, under false names. The affair took on a new, feverish intensity. It wasn't just about pleasure anymore. For Callahan, it was an act of defiance. It was a way to numb the gnawing emptiness Ginevra's absence had carved inside him. Sasha, for her part, was more attentive, more intoxicating than ever. She listened to his tirades about the divorce, offering shrewd advice, couched in soft, sympathetic words. "She's using the baby as leverage, Callahan. It's a classic move," she'd whisper, tracing a finger along his jawline. "You need to protect your assets. More importantly, you need to protect your company." She started asking questions about Draven Innovations, not as a lover, but as a brilliant corporate mind. She was, after all, a top-tier executive. She spoke his language. She asked about Project Chimera, his revolutionary new AI-driven logistics software, the project that was set to double the company's value. He found himself confiding in her, complaining about supply chain issues with the quantum processors, about the friction he was facing from a key board member, Gerald Finney. It was a relief to talk to someone who understood. Ginevra had always supported his work, but she never truly understood the intricacies, the brutal beauty of the machine he had built. Sasha did. Meanwhile, his security chief Rob Miller was growing uneasy. Rob was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s, ex-FBI, and fiercely loyal. He had been with Callahan since the beginning. He had handled Callahan's discretionary needs for years, always with quiet efficiency and a non-judgmental attitude. But this was different. He had seen the toll Ginevra's departure had taken on Callahan, and he did not trust Sasha Petrova. On his own initiative, Rob deepened his background check on her. The initial report had been standard. Born in Russia, emigrated as a child, brilliant academic record, meteoric rise in the corporate world. But Rob dug deeper, using old contacts in federal law enforcement and international intelligence. He found holes, gaps in her timeline, university records that seemed too perfect, a digital footprint that was almost non-existent before she joined her current firm. It was as if she had been professionally fabricated. His suspicions led him to investigate her employer, a mid-level tech firm called Cygnus. But Cygnus itself was a shell, its funding opaque. Following the money trail, Rob discovered its primary investor was a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. And that holding company was a subsidiary of a much larger, more formidable entity, Tanaka Corp. The name hit Rob like a punch to the gut. Kaito Tanaka. The ruthless, enigmatic CEO of Tanaka Corp was Callahan's biggest rival. For years, Tanaka had been trying to gain a foothold in the US market, always blocked by the dominance of Draven Innovations. Project Chimera was the very thing that would permanently lock Tanaka out. Rob felt a cold dread. This wasn't a simple affair. This was corporate espionage of the highest order. Sasha Petrova wasn't a mistress. She was a Trojan horse. He burst into Callahan's office without knocking a breach of protocol that spoke volumes. Callahan was on the phone, laughing at something Sasha had said. He looked up annoyed. "What is it, Rob? I'm busy." "So you need to hang up the phone," Rob said, his voice low and urgent. "Excuse me." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "Hang up the phone." Something in Rob's tone, a deadly seriousness Callahan had never heard before, made him comply. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, and ended the call. This had better be important. "It's Sasha Petrova," Rob said, placing a thin file on Callahan's desk. "She's not who you think she is. She works for Kaito Tanaka." Callahan stared at him, then laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Don't be ridiculous. She works for Cygnus. She's a competitor, sure, but Cygnus is a front for Tanaka Corp, funded entirely by them. Her job for the past year has been to get close to you." To get inside, Rob leaned forward, his face grim. "So think about what you've told her. Project Chimera, the supply chain vulnerabilities, your friction with Gerald Finney on the board. You haven't just been sleeping with the enemy. You've been giving her the blueprints to your entire kingdom." The color drained from Callahan's face. The casual conversations, the pillow talk about proprietary technology, the complaints about his board, it all flashed through his mind, recontextualized into acts of catastrophic self-sabotage. His affair hadn't been a mere indiscretion. It was treason against his own empire. He thought of her questions so sharp and insightful. He had seen it as intellectual passion. Now he saw it as interrogation. He thought of her sympathy about his divorce. He had seen it as comfort. Now he saw it as a tactic to exploit his emotional vulnerability. He had been played. The great Callahan Draven, the master of the universe, had been seduced and manipulated by an enemy agent. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning acid in his throat. He had lost his wife because of a lie, and now it seemed he might lose his company because of that same lie. His world, which had been cracked by Ginevra, was now showing signs of complete structural failure. He looked at Rob, his eyes wide, with a new kind of terror. It was the terror of a king who suddenly realizes his castle is made of sand and the tide is coming in. The revelation of Sasha's betrayal sent Callahan into a tailspin. But it was a different kind of spiral than the one Ginevra had initiated. The divorce was an emotional, personal agony. This was a declaration of war. It was a landscape he understood. For the first time in weeks, the fog of heartbreak was pierced by the sharp, clarifying light of pure adrenaline. "Get me everything he commanded." His voice, a low growl. "I want to know what she ate for breakfast since she was 5 years old. I want to know every person she's ever spoken to, and get our cybersecurity team to do a deep sweep. Assume every system she could have known about is compromised." He then made 2 calls. The first was to David Chen. "The divorce strategy is changing," Callahan said, his voice cold as ice. "We're no longer fighting. We're capitulating. Give her everything she asked for in the initial filing. The house, the accounts, the settlement. No arguments. Just get it signed. I need this off my plate. Now." The second call was to a private number in Washington, D.C., to a man who officially didn't exist, a man who specialized in making corporate problems disappear. For the next 48 hours, Draven Innovations went into lockdown. Callahan, working with Rob and a skeleton crew of his most trusted engineers, unearthed the extent of the damage. It was worse than he imagined. Sasha hadn't needed to hack his systems. He had given her the keys. Details about Project Chimera's unique algorithmic architecture information about the financial weaknesses of his key suppliers, and most critically, the psychological profiles of his board members. He had handed it all to her on a silver platter during moments of perceived intimacy. He was a fool. A monumental, arrogant fool. The first blow landed 3 days later. Tanaka Corp announced a groundbreaking new AI logistics platform, Project Kitsune. The technical specifications described in their press release were shockingly similar to Callahan's own Project Chimera. The market buzzed with speculation. Had Draven's prized project been leaked, the company's stock took an immediate 10% hit. The second blow came 2 days after that. Tanaka Corp began aggressively poaching his key suppliers, offering them incredibly favorable terms, exploiting the very weaknesses Callahan had complained about to Sasha. His supply chain for the quantum processors was thrown into chaos. The third and most devastating blow was the hostile takeover bid. Leveraging the sudden dip in stock price and the narrative of instability, Tanaka Corp made a public offer to acquire Draven Innovations. The offer was just high enough to be tempting to shareholders who were spooked by the recent turmoil. Kaito Tanaka, in a public statement, spoke of synergies and a new era of leadership, a thinly veiled attack on Callahan's increasingly erratic behavior, which was now being selectively leaked to the financial press. Callahan found himself in a war on 2 fronts. His board was in a panic. The same people who had celebrated his genius a month ago were now whispering about his personal life, his reliability. His most vocal critic was Gerald Finney, the board member he'd complained about to Sasha. Finney, now sensing an opportunity, began to lobby other board members, arguing that accepting Tanaka's offer was the only way to save their investment. Callahan was trapped. He spent his days in brutal back-to-back meetings, trying to shore up support to fight off the corporate raid. He spent his nights alone in the cavernous, empty apartment, the silence a constant reminder of Ginevra. The home she had built felt like a museum of a dead life. He'd walk past the room they had designed as a nursery, the door now closed, and feel a physical ache in his chest. In a moment of desperation, he drove to her brother's brownstone. He waited outside for hours, hoping to catch her. When she finally emerged, her pregnancy more pronounced than ever, she looked healthy, serene. She was glowing. He got out of the car and for a moment, seeing the shock on her face, he thought he saw a flicker of the old affection. "Ginevra, please," he began, his voice raw. "Just talk to me." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Callahan, there's nothing to talk about. My lawyer received the signed papers from David. You agreed to everything. I appreciate you not making it difficult. I don't care about the money, Ginevra, he said, taking a step closer. I was a fool. I know that. I made the biggest mistake of my life. But my company, my life's work, it's all falling apart. She looked at him, and there was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet finality. That company is the reason our marriage failed, Callahan. You cared more about it than you ever cared about us. You talk about it like it's your child. Well, I'm about to have a real child, and my only concern is his future, a future far away from your drama and your betrayals. They're connected, he said, his voice rising in desperation. The woman I was with, she was a corporate spy. She stole my research. Tanaka is trying to take my company. Everything that I was going to give to you to Spencer, it could all be gone. He expected shock sympathy, perhaps even a rallying to his side. Instead, Ginevra's expression hardened. So let me understand this, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. The affair you had, the one that destroyed our family and is costing you your legacy, wasn't even for passion or love. It was for your ego. You were so busy being the smartest man in the room that you let an enemy walk right through your front door, and you handed her your crown. And now you come to me, the woman you humiliated, expecting what help absolution? She shook her head, a sad, bitter smile on her lips. You reap what you sow, Callahan. You built your empire on the idea that you were untouchable. Maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to fall. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk as the city bustled around him, utterly alone. Her words echoed in his mind, more damning than anything Kaito Tanaka could ever say. She was right. He had treated his life like a game of chess, and he had sacrificed his queen for nothing, only to find himself in checkmate. The emergency board meeting to vote on the Tanaka takeover was in 2 days. He had no moves left. The air in the 40th floor boardroom of Draven Innovations was thick with tension and the smell of fear. Callahan stood at the head of the massive oak table, the city skyline, a glittering, indifferent backdrop. He looked out at the faces of his board members, men and women who had ridden his coattails to immense wealth, who had toasted his name at galas, who were now looking at him like he was a liability. Gerald Finney sat at the opposite end, his expression smug, a folder from Tanaka Corp placed neatly in front of him. Callahan had spent the last 48 hours in a desperate last-ditch effort to rally support. He had called in every favor, leveraged every relationship, and presented a counter-strategy, a radical restructuring, and a stock buyback plan to consolidate control. But it was too little, too late. The narrative was set. Callahan Draven, the brilliant but reckless founder, had let his personal chaos compromise the company. Tanaka's offer was safe. It was stable. The facts are clear. Finney was saying, his voice resonating with false sincerity. Mr. Tanaka's offer represents a 30% premium on our current market value. It provides stability in a time of unprecedented turmoil and protects shareholder value. Mr. Draven's personal complications have put this company at grave risk. Callahan listened, his jaw tight. He could see the votes slipping away. He had started with 4 solid allies. Now he was down to 1, maybe 2. The others refused to meet his gaze. A vote for the Tanaka acquisition is a vote to sell the soul of this company. Callahan countered, his voice hoarse with fatigue. We are innovators. We don't get acquired. We acquire. Project Chimera. My project will redefine global logistics. Selling now is like selling Apple the day before they announced the iPhone. An iPhone that your competitor is already marketing, Finney retorted sharply. Your personal indiscretion has handed our crown jewels to the enemy, Callahan. This vote is not about the company's soul. It's about damage control. The room fell silent. The motion was on the table. The chairman of the board, a stern man named Howard Price, cleared his throat. We will now proceed to the vote. All in favor of accepting the acquisition offer from Tanaka Corp. Suddenly, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Ginevra Draven. A collective gasp went through the room. She was 8 months pregnant now, a vision of maternal strength in a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Beside her stood her brother, Leo Morrison, carrying a leather briefcase. Callahan stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. He thought he was hallucinating. "Ginevra, what are you doing here?" Gerald Finney stood up, his face flushing with anger. "This is a closed board meeting, security. She has a right to be here." Leo said, his voice calm and authoritative, as he stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He placed a document on the table. "Pursuant to the prenuptial and post-nuptial agreements signed by Mr. and Mrs. Draven, 10% of Mr. Draven's founding shares are held in an irrevocable trust for his marital issue. As the legal guardian of the sole, albeit unborn beneficiary of that trust, Mrs. Draven is entitled to exercise the voting rights of those shares." A stunned silence descended. Callahan had forgotten. Years ago, in a moment of what he'd considered grand romanticism after they decided to start a family, he had set up the trust. It was an ironclad, unchangeable instrument designed to protect his future children. He never imagined it would be used against him, or for him. He had no idea what she was about to do. Ginevra walked slowly to the table, her presence commanding the full attention of the room. She didn't look at Callahan. She addressed the board. "Ginevra, I have read Mr. Tanaka's proposal, and I have read my husband's counter-proposal." She used the word husband with a deliberate clinical precision. "Both are flawed. Mr. Tanaka seeks to cannibalize this company for its intellectual property. Callahan seeks to maintain a status quo that his own reckless behavior has proven is unsustainable." She paused, her cool blue eyes sweeping across the faces of the board members. "I am not here to save my husband. In fact, I agree with Mr. Finney. Callahan's leadership has become a liability." Callahan felt the blood drain from his face. This was it. She was here to deliver the final killing blow. However she continued, her voice gaining strength, "I am also not here to watch the company that will one day form my son's birthright be sold for parts to our greatest rival. There is a third option." She looked directly at Howard Price, the chairman. "I will be voting the trust's 10% share against the Tanaka acquisition. I know for a fact that this vote, combined with the shares still loyal to Callahan, is enough to block the sale." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Finney looked apoplectic. But Ginevra added, raising her hand for silence, "My vote is conditional. I am proposing a motion of no confidence in Callahan Draven as CEO." Callahan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "I propose he be removed from his position, effective immediately. He will retain his shares and a title Chief Innovation Officer perhaps, but he will have no executive authority. In his place, I nominate Howard Price as interim CEO, tasked with stabilizing the company, neutralizing the threat from Tanaka, and guiding Project Chimera to its launch." She had done it. In one move, she had checkmated everyone. She had saved the company from Tanaka, but she had taken Callahan's throne. She wasn't saving him. She was saving the company from him. "This is my son's legacy you're gambling with," she concluded, her voice ringing with indisputable moral authority. "I will not allow it to be destroyed by corporate vultures from the outside, nor by the ego of a broken man from the inside. The choice is yours. A hostile takeover or a new beginning? Vote. The room was silent for a full 30 seconds. Then Howard Price, a man known for his cautious pragmatism, looked at Ginevra, then at Callahan's shattered expression, and finally at the furious face of Gerald Finney. "I second Mrs. Dreven's motion," Price said. The vote was a formality. One by one, the board members fell in line. The Tanaka deal was dead, and so was Callahan's reign as CEO. Ginevra turned and walked out of the room without a single backward glance. She hadn't come as a wife or an ex-wife. She had come as a queen, protecting her heir's inheritance. Callahan Dreven was left standing in the ruins of his own kingdom, dethroned by the very woman he had so carelessly discarded. He had lost everything that defined him, and in a final brutal twist of irony, he had been saved by the one person he had wronged the most. The 6 months that followed the boardroom coup felt like a slow, agonizing crawl through the wreckage of a life. The world did not end in a fiery explosion. It simply remade itself meticulously, erasing Callahan Dreven from its center. The initial shock of his dethronement gave way to a bitter, impotent rage. He was a king in exile, forced to walk the halls of a palace that was no longer his. His new title, Chief Innovation Officer, was a cruel joke, a gilded cage, where he could see his vision for Project Chimera come to life, but was forbidden to touch the controls. He'd sit in strategy meetings, a silent ghost at the table listening, as Howard Price, calm, effective, and utterly in charge, issued directives about the project Callahan had bled for. The board members, once his loyal disciples, would offer him polite, pitying nods before turning back to the new son. His suggestions were heard with patient indulgence, then quietly shelved. The company he had built from a dream in a garage now hummed along with a new, more stable rhythm, and he was forced to accept the terrifying truth it didn't need him. His nights were the worst. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his ascent, became a monument to his isolation. Every empty room echoed with Ginevra's absence. He'd stand before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittering below, like a sea of jewels he could no longer possess, and feel an emptiness so profound it was a physical weight in his chest. The rage began to exhaust itself, burning away, until only the cold grey ash of despair remained. He started seeing a therapist, a decision the old Callahan would have mocked as the ultimate admission of weakness. Dr. Alani was a sharp, unassuming woman who refused to be swayed by his lingering charisma or his attempts to intellectualize his pain. "You didn't just lose a company, Mr. Dreven," she said, during one session, her words cutting through his defenses. "You lost the mirror that told you who you were. The question is what's left when there are no reflections." The question haunted him. Without the titles, CEO, husband, visionary, who was he? The answer he feared was nothing. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, his phone buzzed. He expected another sterile corporate update. Instead, it was a text from a number he hadn't contacted in months, Leo Morrison. It contained only a time, a hospital name, and 3 words that shattered the last of his defenses. "It's a girl. A girl. Not Spencer. A daughter." He stared at the words, his mind struggling to process them. All his plans, his arrogant projections for a male heir to carry on the Dreven name and legacy, dissolved into static. He had built an entire future around a son who never existed, another extension of his own ego, a daughter. She was entirely her own person, a new and unknown variable in an equation he thought he had solved. He stumbled back from his desk, the phone slipping from his grasp. A great shuddering sob tore through him, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. He collapsed into his chair and wept. Not for his lost empire or his wounded pride, but for the profound, irreversible loss of his family, for the precious years he had squandered, and for a little girl, a stranger, whom he had wronged before she had even taken her first breath. That breakdown was a baptism. The man who stood up afterward was not the same one who had fallen. The last vestiges of his rage and self-pity were washed away, leaving a raw, humbled core. He returned to his office, not to reclaim power, but to find purpose. He began to work, truly work, for the first time in years. He sketched new ideas on a simple notepad, not for market disruption, but for the simple, forgotten joy of creation. He rediscovered the spark that had driven him as a young man in a garage long before it became twisted into a tool for ego and domination. 2 months later, his hands trembling slightly, he dialed Leo's number. He had rehearsed what he would say, but when Leo answered, the practiced words vanished. "I want to see her," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual command. "Please, no demands, no conditions. I need to see my daughter, if Ginevra will allow it." A week later, he found himself standing on the rain-slicked steps of a beautiful light-filled brownstone in a part of the city he rarely visited. It wasn't as grand as his penthouse, but the warm light spilling from the windows and the sound of soft music from within spoke of a life being lived, not just displayed. Ginevra opened the door. She looked tired in the way all new mothers do, but a deep, unshakable serenity radiated from her. Motherhood wasn't just suiting her. It had fortified her. She led him into a living room filled with art books and the comfortable clutter of a new baby. On a large table, architectural drafts were spread out, her own relaunched firm clearly thriving. This was her world built from the ground up on her own terms. In a bassinet by the window, bathed in the soft afternoon light, his daughter was sleeping. He approached with the reverence of a man entering a holy site. She was a swirl of pink skin, dark hair, and impossibly delicate features. He could see a hint of himself in the shape of her mouth, a trace of Ginevra in the curve of her brow. He reached out, a hesitant, trembling finger, and gently touched her tiny hand. Her fingers, no bigger than grains of rice, instinctively curled around his. In that moment, the entire world fell away. There were no stock prices, no boardrooms, no betrayals. There was only this perfect, breathing miracle, and a wave of pure, unselfish love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "Her name is Hope Ginevra," said softly from behind him. The name was a final, devastating blow to his old self. It was everything he had lost, and everything she had managed to build from the ruins. "She's beautiful," he whispered, unable to look away. He stayed for nearly an hour, watching his daughter sleep. When it was time to leave, he finally turned to Ginevra, his eyes filled with a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. "I'm sorry, Ginevra," he said, the words raw and uncalculated. He had to force them past the lump in his throat. Not for the company or the money or any of it. "I'm sorry for us. For you, for being so blind. For not seeing what I had until it was designing my demolition from across the room." A small, sad smile touched her lips. It held no malice, only a weary understanding. "I know Callahan." There was no talk of reconciliation. The love they had once shared was a casualty of his war with himself, a delicate thing that could not be rebuilt. But as he stood there, he realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else, entirely. Quieter, humbler. He had lost his kingdom, his queen and his crown, but in the ruins, watching the gentle rise and fall of his daughter's chest, he finally understood. The most valuable asset he had ever possessed wasn't a company forged in his own image. It was a family. And he would spend the rest of his life quietly, patiently, trying to earn the right to be a small part of this new one. Callahan Dreven's story serves as a chilling reminder that the highest towers can cast the longest shadows. He had every material object a person could desire, yet he lost the only things that truly mattered: trust, love, and family. It wasn't the affair itself that destroyed him, but the arrogance and blindness that allowed it to happen. Ginevra, on the other hand, shows us the incredible strength that can be found in the deepest betrayals, not by screaming and crying, but by quietly, intelligently, and strategically reclaiming her own life and her child's future. What do you think was Callahan's downfall deserved? Was Ginevra's move in the boardroom a moment of ultimate empowerment or cold revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a tale of drama and consequence. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the complexities of the human heart.